Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my updated top 50 wide receiver rankings for a full PPR scoring format as we approach our 2024 fantasy football drafts. Now, going into this upcoming weekend, many of us will be drafting, and due to, of course, popular demand, I wanted to go ahead and put out my top 50 rankings in a full PPR, because typically I talk about half PPR rankings on the majority of videos that I produce on this channel, because I want to meet everyone in the middle, whether they do play in a full PPR or standard league. But in this specific video, we are focusing on full PPR. So for those of you who are drafting, I can give you guys all the information, my thought process and opinions in the statistics that justify my ranking so that you are making informed decisions going into this weekend. So with 50 players to talk about, let's go ahead and talk about our number one, CeeDee Lamb. A couple reminders again, if you are looking for my thoughts on a specific player, you can travel down to the description. There are timestamps down there for those of you interested. Additionally, while you're down there, of course, be sure to subscribe. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's talk about CeeDee Lamb. Of course, just a couple days ago, inked a brand new contract. A lot of money. I think it's like, what, $38 million a year? Beautiful. Last season amongst all wide receivers was at the top of the conversation, averaging 11 targets per game and 23.54 fantasy points per game. Amongst all players in the league, was number one in terms of red zone targets and red zone receiving touchdowns. As long as he's going to continue to be in this conversation, and the number one receiving threat of a Dallas Cowboys offense with Dak Prescott, of course, throwing him the ball at this high of a rate, the expectation with no additional target competition within this offense is that CeeDee Lamb should be able to dominate once again this upcoming year. Number two, we have Tyreek Hill, who has been in the top two conversation each of the last 2 years as a member of the Miami Dolphins. So why not a three-peat? Why not continue to let the best player in the National Football League, someone that is quite literally carrying that Miami Dolphins offense week in and week out, continue to be at the top of this conversation? Whether you do select CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill does not bother me. The fact of the matter is both of them are going to ball out. Last season, Tyreek Hill averaging 10.78 targets per game, 23.53 fantasy points per game in a full PPR, and amongst all players in the league, a 36.31% target rate. That means he was being targeted on 36% of the routes that he was running. Pretty ridiculous numbers, and going into 2024 should continue. Number three, we have Ja'Marr Chase. Now it's a little bit different. He's pretty much the last domino that hasn't fallen yet. We have seen Justin Jefferson, Jaylen Waddle, Tyreek Hill got extra money, CeeDee Lamb, Brandin Cooks, all of them have gotten their money at the wide receiver position. A huge boom in terms of overall cash flow going towards the wide receiver position this offseason. I'm anticipating that the agents of Ja'Marr Chase are going to be able to get the job done and get a contract inked by at least Monday. Even though he is currently not practicing, he is present for practice, which is a sign of like good faith. Like, hey, we can get this job done, or we can get the deal done, so I can get to, doing what I do best, and of course, helping this team win games. Last season, from weeks 3 through 10, with a healthy Joe Burrow, Ja'Marr Chase was averaging 23.33 fantasy points per game. If we can get a full season of healthy Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase, he could very easily finish as the number one overall at the position. Number four, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who last season was averaging 20.68 fantasy points per game. Considering he's the number one receiver of his offense, and considering how much they score on a weekly basis, and the volume of targets he continues to get, 10.42 per game. The idea of selecting Amon-Ra at the 1.05 or 1.06 is an automatic in my mind, especially ahead of some of these other running backs like Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson. He just puts up too many points too often. He finds himself open considering the mismatches that they create for him within the slot position. He had an open target rate of 82% last season. So again, if they continue to send the ball in his direction as often as they do, this offense continues to play well. Amon-Ra St. Brown, again, was injured all of last season and yet still balled out at that capacity. The final wide receiver within the S tier is Justin Jefferson. Despite the fact that, he is losing the talent of Kirk Cousins as a starting quarterback, and now we have a guy like Sam Darnold. Even without Kirk Cousins in the lineup, we have seen Justin Jefferson last season at the back 4 games of the year, weeks 15 through 18. Justin Jefferson was averaging 11 targets per game and 22.1 fantasy points per game in a full PPR. Kevin O'Connell, the head coach and the primary play caller of this offense, is going to allow this offense to quite literally flow through Justin Jefferson. Obviously, because of Hawkinson's injury and Addison's injury recently, all the targets should be going in the direction of Jefferson. Wouldn't surprise me if he starts the year with 15 targets per game on average. Now, before we continue and talk about more of the wide receivers, I want to remind you guys, if you guys want additional content, my thoughts on going ahead and traversing your upcoming draft, be sure to go ahead, travel down to the description, check out Underdog Fantasy or Patreon, where you can find my 2024 fantasy football draft guide. Now, if you check out Underdog Fantasy, not only will you be able to get, potential free picks going into this upcoming, week, the NFL season is not too far away. So you can go ahead and put together a pick'em slip in terms of the total yards that Travis Kelce will have on the opening day game against the Baltimore Ravens. So all you got to do is click on the link, travel over to Underdog Fantasy. By using code Andrew and making a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, you're going to get my 2024 Fantasy Football Draft Guide, the associated rankings, which is by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR. And then I'll also send you guys Sunday morning rankings for the remainder of the season, weeks 1 through 18, which include weekly rankings, all positions, including flex, half PPR, full PPR. So if you guys want an advantage upon your league mates for the remainder of the season, be sure to take advantage of the opportunity. Check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. And if in fact you are not eligible, you can also check out the Patreon. All of this content and much more available there. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, let's talk about the beginning of our A tier in a full PPR scoring format. Yes, it is in fact Garrett Wilson. He gets a major upgrade at quarterback. Obviously going from guys like Joe Flacco, Mike White, and Zach Wilson over the course of the last couple of years, even Trevor Siemian a little bit last year. You know, there is a huge upgrade on hand here. Even with mediocre quarterbacks like Joe Flacco and Mike White, back in 2022, in those games, Garrett Wilson was still averaging 17.29 fantasy points per game. So imagine what he's going to be capable of accomplishing with Aaron Rodgers under center. The last 2 seasons that Davante Adams played with Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams was averaging 11 targets per game and 24.45 fantasy points per game. I'm hoping that Garrett Wilson can elevate to that level in year 3. Number 7, we have A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, over the course of the last 2 seasons with the Philadelphia Eagles, has not ranked as the number 7 overall wide receiver. In fact, he has been a top 6 wide receiver in each of the last 2 seasons. Last year, putting up incredible numbers, setting a career high in terms of total targets and receptions. As the best friend of Jalen Hurts, you anticipate those kind of numbers to continue to go in his direction. Last year, he was averaging 18.1 fantasy points per game, had himself a 6-game streak in which he had over 125 receiving yards, breaking an NFL record. And as long as, the offense is going to continue to improve with the new offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, coming in, Saquon Barkley. Again, the Philadelphia Eagles are trending in the right direction, and so is A.J. Brown as the number 1 target. Number 8, we have Puka Nacua. We heard great news regarding Puka Nacua yesterday in regards to him fully practicing, because again, we hadn't heard much due to the knee injury that he sustained a couple weeks back. But now that we know that he is a full participant at practice, going into week 1, that is a great sign. Again, this is a wide receiver that broke the record for most receptions and receiving yards by a rookie wide receiver in NFL history. Additionally, in games last season with a healthy Cooper Kupp and a healthy Matthew Stafford, was still averaging 17.67 fantasy points per game. The expectation is that Puka Nacua in year 2 should continue to improve, build upon what he did last year, and have himself another successful season as potentially the number 1 receiving option of a Los Angeles Rams and Sean McVay offense. Number 9, we have Davante Adams, a future Hall of Fame wide receiver that, despite the fact that he has played with terrible quarterback play over the course of the last 2 years, has been incredible. I mean, in the last 2 years in a full PPR, ranked as the number 10 and number 3 overall, regardless of the fact that he played with Aiden O'Connell from weeks 9 through 18, he was averaging 10.78 targets per game and 14.91 fantasy points per game. He gets a huge upgrade with Gardner Minshew this season. Minshew last season, in the 13 games he played with a healthy Michael Pittman Jr., of course, we saw him target Michael Pittman Jr. 10 plus times in 9 different instances of those 13 games. We should see a lot of opportunity going in the direction of Davante Adams this year, who of course is far too talented to ignore. Number 10, to close out the A tier, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison, again, amongst all the wide receivers that we have seen drafted in recent seasons that have found immediate success in their rookie year, Jefferson's, Jamar Chase, Jaylen Waddle's, Garrett Wilson's, Marvin Harrison may be the best prospect of all. I mean, when we talk about wide receivers who came out of college early and were still able to be a top 5 pick, the only other wide receiver that I can think of that have been able to accomplish that is Jamar Chase. So if we're going to potentially see Jamar Chase type numbers in year 1 for Marvin Harrison Jr., we shouldn't be surprised. Number 1 receiving targets for Kyler Murray over the course of the last couple seasons when Kyler has been healthy have been 10 target per game kind of guys. DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Hollywood Brown. We have seen it year in and year out. We have seen that the history of fantasy football suggests that in the last decade, wide receivers selected within the first 10 picks of their NFL draft often find themselves a lot of success if they can stay healthy. We're talking about over 1,000 yards, over 80 receptions, over 8 touchdowns, and over 200 fantasy points in those circumstances in a full PPR scoring format. So hopefully that is going to continue. And I do expect Marvin Harrison to accomplish even more than those already placed numbers in comparison to all the other talent that we have seen at the wide receiver position over the last decade. Moving on to our number 11. Speaking of the last decade, Mike Evans, over the course of the last decade, has had 10 consecutive years of 1,000 receiving yards. He has been a wide receiver 1 in 7 of the last 10 seasons. He has played 154 of his 163 eligible games. That's 95% of the games. And last season, despite losing Tom Brady and shifting to Baker Mayfield, had himself an incredible year. 16.61 fantasy points per game, even if in fact we are going to see a touchdown regression. Let's say Mike Evans scores 5 less touchdowns, but he has identical receptions, receiving yards, and let's say instead of scoring 13 touchdowns, he has 8 this year. He's still going to be a top 12 to 14 overall wide receiver within the given year. Number 12, we have Drake London. Drake London, again, is a wide receiver that a lot of people are worried about. The fact of the matter is, with a Zach Robinson-led offense, again, Zach Robinson, a former passing game coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams 2022 to 2023, and of course, you have the already built-in rapport with Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins was a part of the Minnesota Vikings. Their head coach, the Minnesota Vikings, Kevin O'Connell, is a former offensive coordinator of the Rams. So the scheme is going to look like what the Rams produce every single year. Yes, are there going to be a little bit of variable differences? Sure. But Drake London should be the Puka Nacua Cooper Cup of this offense, garnering the vast majority of overall opportunities. I mean, when we talk about Kirk Cousins and his number 1 receivers since 2018, his number 1 wide receiver is averaging 155 targets per season and 9.11 targets per game. Anytime Drake London's been able to get himself over 8 targets in a singular game, he's averaging over 15 fantasy points per game. The sky's the limit for this young wide receiver. Number 13, we have the thumbnail of today's episode, Brandin Aiyuk, who yesterday inked a brand new contract, $30 million a year. Congratulations to him on holding out. Of course, making a lot of noise, but getting what he wants. I mean, he deserves it. Last season was incredible despite the lack of opportunity, only getting himself 6.73 targets per game, but 16.24 fantasy points per game on average. Incredible numbers. Now that the contract dispute is stopped and we're ready to get him back on the field practicing, there is less value potentially for Deebo Samuel and a lot more opportunity potentially going in the direction of Brandin Aiyuk, considering he's coming off of 2 incredible years in which he is ranked as a top 15 wide receiver in both circumstances. Number 14, we have Cooper Kupp, who is slowly but surely moving up my rankings. Last season, between weeks 5 through 17, in games in which he played healthy, and so did Matthew Stafford, he was averaging 8.7 targets per game and 14.75 full PPR fantasy points per game. Over a 17-game pace, that's 148 targets and 250.75 fantasy points, which would have made Cooper Kupp last season the wide receiver 13 overall. Considering, again, he was injured last season and wasn't fully healthy at any point due to the hamstring, he definitely has top 12 upside, and that is why we have him in this number 14 conversation. For those of you interested in drafting him earlier than he should be, potentially even ahead of Drake London. I've seen it in a lot of circumstances, even ahead of Mike Evans. Number 15, we have Chris Olave. Chris Olave, again, is continuing to build every single year. And despite the fact that he doesn't have the greatest overall quarterback with Derek Carr certainly knows how to funnel target his primary number 1 wide receiver. I mean, just a couple years back with Davante Adams had 180 targets with Derek Carr. So Chris Olave, coming off of a year in which he averaged 14.45 fantasy points per game, now gets a new offensive coordinator in Clint Kubiak, the former passing game coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers last year. Of course, Kyle Shanahan's schemes allow for wide receivers to make plays in the open and be able to garner a lot of yards after the catch. Of course, Aiyuk and Deebo have made a lot of money in their names based on that overall scheme. So if in fact we're going to see Chris Olave utilized within that form, fantastic. Not to forget, of course, Clint Kubiak used to be the offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings back in 2021. In that given year, they were able to get Justin Jefferson 160 targets. So Chris Olave has a lot of opportunity, and of course has a brand new offense that hopefully Derek Carr can support him in this year. Number 16, to close out the B tier, we have Deebo Samuel. Just because Brandin Aiyuk is back doesn't mean that Deebo Samuel is out of the overall conversation. He has been a top 12 wide receiver in the last 2 healthy seasons that he has played. Over the course of the 2023 year, in games in which he had 4 or more targets, he was averaging 20.48 fantasy points per game. He was able to get those 4 or more targets in 11 of his 13 healthy games. Additionally, of those 11 games, 8 of them consisted of more than 15.5 fantasy points. So again, Deebo Samuel's a stud, and he's going to continue to be fantasy relevant, whether it is half PPR, full PPR, or standard, and of course, demands to be in this top 16 conversation. Number 17, we have DJ Moore. Last season, with a healthy Justin Fields, was averaging 19.77 fantasy points per game. That is ridiculous numbers, only on 8.25 targets per game. And even if you exclude the massive game in which he had over 40 fantasy points against the Washington Commanders, he was still averaging 17 plus fantasy points per game. So if we are in the realm of possibility of getting a quarterback improvement now with Caleb Williams, probably the best quarterback that DJ Moore has played with in his entire career. And trust me, he's played with a lot of quarterbacks, whether it has been with the Carolina Panthers organization or the Chicago Bears last season. Now you get a new offensive coordinator. The offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, formerly of the Seahawks, able to help support DK Metcalf, finishes the number 16, 21, and 14 overall wide receiver in fantasy. DJ Moore, number 17, a safe overall ranking in a full PPR. Number 18, we have Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle's been dealing with a little bit of a calf injury. That's what it seems like, at least, and he hasn't been able to fully participate in practices, and that certainly does concern me, but a full healthy Jaylen Waddle is not to be messed around with. And yes, we haven't seen a full healthy Jaylen Waddle for an entire season in quite a while. Last year, obviously, dealt with a lot of injuries. If you were to just take last season's games in which he was healthy and spread that across a 17-game pace, he was on pace for 133 targets, 92 receptions, 1,276 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, 255.1 fantasy points, which would have made him wide receiver 13 or wide receiver 14 in a full PPR. So again, there is a lot of potential for Jaylen Waddle, who is ranked as the number 8 and the number 13 wide receiver back in 2021 and 2022. Just has to stay healthy and should be close to that top tier conversation, potentially even a wide receiver one this year. Number 19, we have Nico Collins, who's coming off of a breakout year in which he averaged 18.54 fantasy points per game in healthy games between weeks 1 through 20. Now, yes, he is getting more target competition now with a healthy Tank Dell and, of course, Stefon Diggs. Also, Joe Mixon out of the backfield is going to get himself a couple opportunities here and there. But ultimately, Nico Collins is still going to be the number one target of this offense. He's the X receiver, and on top of that, I do anticipate to see the Houston Texans throw the ball far more this upcoming season, far more 11 personnel sets, which should lead up to Nico Collins continuing to find himself success in 2024. Number 20, we have DeVonta Smith, one of my favorite wide receivers of the draft this year. In the last 2 seasons, has finished as the number 19 and the number 9 overall wide receiver in a full PPR scoring format last year, averaging 14.73 fantasy points per game on only 7.29 targets per game. Now that the Philadelphia Eagles bring in their third offensive coordinator in 3 years with Kellen Moore, the former offensive coordinator of the Chargers last season, and of course, the Dallas Cowboys between 2019 to 2022. In those years, of course, specifically last year, was able to elevate Keenan Allen within the slot position and make him a complete monster. In 2022, with CeeDee Lamb, able to get him highly utilized within the slot and, got him within the top 6 overall rankings. DeVonta Smith should see himself a lot of slot opportunity. From what we have heard at training camp, he's the motion man within this offense. He's utilized primarily in the slot position, on 3 wide receiver sets, even in 2 wide receiver sets. There's a lot of opportunity here for him to be a breakout candidate and have another incredible season, potentially within the top 12 next to A.J. Brown. Number 21, we have DK Metcalf. Like I mentioned earlier, Shane Waldron has elevated DK Metcalf over the course of the last 3 seasons, regardless of which quarterback has played, Russell Wilson and or Geno Smith, to being the number 14, 21, and 16 in a full PPR scoring format last season on 7.44 targets per game, averaging 14.09 fantasy points per game. But now you get a new offensive coordinator. You bring in Ryan Grubb, the former offensive coordinator of the Washington Huskies. In that offense with Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, they were all about the deep ball. If they continue the commitment to the deep ball, DK Metcalf should be benefiting a lot in terms of fantasy upside this upcoming season. The final player I wanted to mention within the C tier is Michael Pittman Jr. I really do believe that there is a chance that Michael Pittman Jr. blows out this overall ranking. Over the course of the last 3 seasons, has finished as wide receiver 13, 20, and 17. And he's played with a plethora of different quarterbacks. Matt Ryan, Gardner Minshew, Carson Wentz. Now he has an opportunity with Anthony Richardson. Now, last season had himself an incredible year. 10.6 targets per game, 17.03 fantasy points per game. 9 of his 13 healthy games he played with Minshew resulted in 10 plus targets. So again, a lot of opportunity. Is he going to get that level of opportunity this year? I don't think so. And that's why I've got him a little bit ranked lower than he has finished over the course of the last 3 years. But there is a chance that Michael Pittman Jr., if a high volume of touchdowns is associated with his overall box score, could end up blowing out the number 22 rank. Number 23, we have Rashee Rice. Again, Rashee Rice, based on the history of fantasy football and what we have seen from rookie wide receivers, when you find the level of success that Rashee Rice did in year 1, the history suggests that you're going to find not only the ability to repeat that performance, but even improve in year 2. Last season, from week 7 through 17, once he became a full-fledged starter within this offense, playing 71% of the snaps, was averaging 15.53 fantasy points per game in a full PPR scoring format, and was the number 17 overall wide receiver throughout that span of time. He has gained the trust of Patrick Mahomes. He's gotten himself a lot of opportunity down in the red zone, which again, Patrick Mahomes only keeps that for guys like Travis Kelce because he trusts him so much. Rashee Rice is already in that conversation as we approach 2024. Speaking of 24, we have our number 24, Stefon Diggs, who is coming off of 4 consecutive seasons of 100 plus receptions. And prior to the offensive coordinator change, in Buffalo last year, obviously week 10, they played against the Denver Broncos. It didn't go well. They fired their offensive coordinator. But prior to the firing of that, he was averaging 10.2 targets per game and 20.18 fantasy points per game. Stefon Diggs still has the elite trait. He is still up there amongst all of the best wide receivers, yet a lot of people are forgetting his ability. I understand. He is joining an offense in which there is only one ball, but there is a lot of threats with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon, and now Stefon Diggs. With all this target competition, it does lower the potential of Stefon Diggs, but it would not surprise me if he blows out the number 24 rank. Number 25, we have Malik Nabers, who, even though he is dealing with Daniel Jones, is going to be littered with targets because he is quite literally the offense of this team. With no Saquon Barkley, their identity is going to be throwing the ball to Malik Nabers. Since 2014, the last decade of fantasy football, like I mentioned in regards to someone like Marvin Harrison Jr., when we have seen wide receivers selected in the top 10 picks of their NFL draft, 7 of those 11 wide receivers stayed healthy for their entire rookie season. They were averaging 130 targets, 80 receptions, 1,100 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. I mean, again, 225 plus fantasy points on average, which is the equivalent of last season being, wide receiver 22. So the number 25 rank may be lower. That's mainly because I don't trust Daniel Jones, but nonetheless, Malik Nabers should immediately find himself success in the National Football League. Number 26, we have T. Higgins, who, again, when he has been healthy and he has had a healthy Joe Burrow, the guy is a 13 to 15 fantasy point per game guy in a full PPR. So as long as he can stay healthy this year, which he has never been able to do throughout his entire career, especially the last 3 seasons, 2021 and 2023, hasn't been able to stay healthy on a consistent basis. But if he can stay healthy in this offense, in the year in which, again, it is very shaky as to whether or not we are going to see Jamar Chase start week 1, in a prove-it year for T. Higgins, again, he did not get a contract this offseason. And he is playing on the franchise tag. He is trying to earn himself a huge contract this upcoming offseason. I'm expecting T. Higgins to have his best year yet. Number 26, we have Amari Cooper. Again, a lot of people have kind of forgotten about Amari Cooper. He's finished as the number 20 overall wide receiver last year with 4 different quarterbacks, and the number 10 the year prior with Brissett and Watson. Last season, in games in which he played with Deshaun Watson, was averaging 17.6 fantasy points per game in a full PPR. He is highly underrated, and that's kind of the theme that we have seen. As soon as I got to Michael Pittman Jr., all of these guys since then, from 22 beyond, are guys that could very easily outproduce this current overall ranking and have themselves incredible years. And that's why we typically want to go after these guys. If you're able to, get your early investment in a running back, get your hero, then address wide receiver, get your tight end, get your stud quarterback, maybe jump into the running back conversation way after that. Fantastic. But guys like Amari Cooper, often slept on, and their value is only going up this season. Number 28, Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin has the best quarterback that he has played with on hand now with Jayden Daniels. Obviously, a former Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. I mean, in comparison to what he had to deal with last season with, Sam Howell, 35% of the overall targets that Terry McLaurin had were deemed uncatchable. Yet he was able to average 12.3 fantasy points per game. You bring in a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator. The expectation is that Terry McLaurin, of course, in the absence of Jahan Dotson, considering now he has been traded, should be clearing away, number one, getting himself a lot of opportunity, far more than 7.67 that he was averaging last season. Our next wide receiver is Zay Flowers. Another one of these rookie wide receivers last year that found immediate success and is only going to continue that. Now, his success was primarily due to the fact that Mark Andrews missed a significant amount of time. In weeks 1 and in 12 through 17, in the games in which, of course, Mark Andrews was out due to injury, we had Zay Flowers averaging 17.4 fantasy points per game. Now, a lot of that overall consistency was due to overall touchdowns scored, whether it was on the ground or through the air. But going into this year with the return of Mark Andrews, a potential bigger role for Isaiah Likely, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers is still the number 2 option and still going to be fantasy relevant. I just don't see him anywhere past number 29 in a full PPR. Number 30, we have Tank Dell. We've talked about it in the past. We have seen 3 different offenses over the course of the last 5 years be able to get 3 wide receivers to be top 32 ranked in a full PPR scoring format. The 2021 Bengals, the 2020 Panthers, and the 2020 Steelers. In fact, the 2020 Panthers and Steelers had 3 wide receivers all within the top 25 in those given years. So why not Tank Dell this year? A guy that last season, in games in which he played 60% of the snaps or more, had a higher target share and air yard share in comparison to Nico Collins. Additionally, in those games, averaging 18.79 fantasy points per game. I'm anticipating him to be the number 3, but could very easily finish as the number 1 receiving target of this Houston Texans offense. Number 31, we have George Pickens. Yes, he gets a huge improvement at quarterback with Russell Wilson. And last season, unfortunately, was only able to average 12.28 fantasy points per game with the quarterback contributions that he was given. Now, despite the quarterback improvement, the reason why I still have George Pickens here at 31 is because of the offensive coordinator. I don't trust that they're going to be able to throw the ball enough in Pittsburgh with Arthur Smith there. Obviously, the last couple years, we saw a lot of suffering from Drake London and Kyle Pitts because of this. So George, Pickens scares me, especially in a full PPR going into this year. Otherwise, again, he always is going to be able to make couple good plays, here and there. Last season was only able to get himself 7 games of over 10 fantasy points. These are the risks that really do scare me in this case. Number 32, we have Calvin Ridley. He's moving into a new offense, and obviously that entire organization has a little bit of a facelift with a new head coach, new offensive play caller, and a quarterback that is unproven with Will Levis. And that is certainly scary, but what we have heard this offseason is that Brian Callahan, their head coach and primary play caller, a former OC of the Cincinnati Bengals the last couple of years, is going to utilize Calvin Ridley as the Jamar Chase of this offense. Most recently, last season, from weeks 8 through 15 in games in which Will Levis played healthy, he was able to help DeAndre Hopkins average 15.4 fantasy points per game and 8.63 targets per game. If that level of opportunity goes in the direction of Calvin Ridley and he's utilized as the Jamar Chase of this team, with DeAndre Hopkins dealing with a bunch of injuries, the expectation is that Calvin Ridley should be valuable in fantasy. Number 33, we have Diontae Johnson. Like I've mentioned a lot this offseason, Diontae Johnson can very easily outproduce this number, primarily because of what we see in this offense. First and foremost, their head coach and primary play caller, Dave Canales, has been able to support the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense last year, and in 2022, the Seattle Seahawks. Their number 1 wide receivers, Mike Evans, 16.61 fantasy points per game last year. DK Metcalf back in 2022, 13.34 fantasy points per game. Diontae Johnson is in line to be the de facto number 1 of this offense, in which Dave Canales should be elevating the play of Bryce Young. Number 34, we have Chris Godwin. Speaking of outproducing their overall numbers, Chris Godwin should be able to outproduce 34. The fact of the matter is he will be able to outproduce this number, and I can guarantee it, primarily because there is going to be injuries to other players that is going to increase the potential, fantasy point contribution and the ranking of Chris Godwin. But this year, they're moving him back into the slot position where he has found majority of his success within his career. Their new offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, of course, has a familiarity with the Los Angeles Rams, considering, of course, he was a coach for them in the past, has a familiarity, of course, with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield played with the Rams back in 2022. Liam Cohen was the OC at that time. So if, in fact, they're going to utilize Godwin within the Cooper Kupp role, a full healthy season should lead to a lot of success for Chris Godwin. 35, we have Christian Kirk, who's been dealing with an injury as of late, and hopefully he can get back to being 100% himself, because 100% of Christian Kirk is incredible. I mean, back in 2022, was a top 12 wide receiver, averaging 14.22 fantasy points per game. Last season, in games in which he played 65% of the snaps or more between weeks 2 through 12. Again, 14.48 fantasy points per game prior to his injury. I know that Evan Ingram's role is going to grow, and with that and the potential injury that is currently plaguing Christian Kirk, I've kind of pushed him down within my rankings, but he should still be a top 36 potential wide receiver going into the season. Moving on to our number 36, we have Jayden Reed. Another one of these wide receivers that in year 1 found themselves a lot of success. Throughout weeks 10 through 18, really was able to take over this offense and score himself 7 touchdowns in 8 games due to the absence of Christian Watson. And of course, the elevation of Jordan Love. So if that Jordan Love momentum is going to continue, and potentially Jayden Reed can continue to be the number 1 receiving option of this offense last season amongst all wide receivers. Number 8 in terms of fantasy points per route run. Number 5 in terms of fantasy points per target. It was top 12 in terms of route win rate against man coverage. Jayden Reed could end up continuing his top 36 success once again this upcoming year. Number 37, we have Keenan Allen. In my opinion, Keenan Allen will have far too much target, competition, and he's not going to be able to garner himself 9, 10, 12 targets per game like he's been able to do over the course of the last couple seasons. He is not going to be the number 1 primary threat of this offense like he has been with the Chargers and Justin Herbert. And with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift in the conversation, it lowers his overall value. Even though he is coming off of his best season in terms of fantasy points per game on average, I do anticipate to see Keenan Allen take a step back with guys like DJ Moore, Rome Odunze being the primary threats, within these 12 personnel sets, which they're going to utilize considering, of course, Shane Waldron is the offensive coordinator. They have Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, etc. Number 38, we have Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He could even have a higher rank depending on what kind of information we hear regarding Tyler Lockett. He is currently dealing with an injury himself, may end up missing game 1. So if in fact that ends up being the case, of course, Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to be in line to begin the season as the number 2 receiving threat of this offense, which certainly has a lot of value. We have seen Tyler Lockett over the years, within this offense, with a different offensive coordinator, sure, but be able to be a top 13 overall wide receiver on multiple occasions. So if Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to pick up the torch and continue on with that, and the legacy of Tyler Lockett being the number 2 receiving option in this offense, not a bad overall role for JSN in year 2. Number 39, we have Courtland Sutton, another one of these veteran wide receivers that I'm not expecting much out of, despite the fact that he is the by far and away de facto number 1 of his offense, and his only target competition is Marvin Mims and Greg Dulcich, and potentially, Jaleel McLaughlin, Javonte Williams out of the backfield. The fact of the matter is he still has a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. There's going to be a lot of learning within this offense and trying to continue to help improve the game of Bo Nix. It may lead to a lot of overall upside games for Courtland Sutton scoring touchdowns, but being able to predict those are going to be difficult. Number 40, we have Brian Thomas Jr., a first-round rookie wide receiver that, again, I anticipate to be the next Calvin Ridley of this offense. When we talk about since 2019, there have been a bunch of wide receivers selected within the first round of their respective draft. Of the wide receivers who have been healthy and played 15 games minimum, they're averaging 72 receptions, 955 yards, 6 touchdowns, and have, on average, been able to be the wide receiver 32 to 33 in a full PPR scoring format. The expectation is that Brian Thomas Jr. should be able to get into this conversation and be the next Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. The next wide receiver is Joshua Palmer, one of these sleeper wide receivers that I continue to draft in many of my drafts, considering his current ADP. Last season, in games in which we did not have Mike Williams in the lineup from weeks 3 through 18, was averaging 12.63 fantasy points per game. Considering this offense no longer has Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett, or Austin Eckler, the majority stakeholders in terms of overall targets within this offense over the course of the last 3+ seasons, Josh Palmer has the most experience amongst all the wide receivers in this offense with Justin Herbert, should automatically be a relevant wide receiver and the number 1 of the Los Angeles Chargers this season. Number 42, we have Rome Odunze. I've moved him down within a full PPR scoring format in comparison to Keenan Allen, primarily because even though the expectation is that he should be able to be a top 36 ranked wide receiver based on the history of success of top 10 ranked wide receivers in their respective drafts. I mentioned this in regards to Malik Nabers and, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. Rome Odunze, in my mind, with Keenan Allen as the gatekeeper and the potential of more points per reception, I do see him as a lesser option in a full PPR in comparison to a half PPR, considering I do anticipate and project him to have far less receptions than many may believe. Moving on to our number 42, we have Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy, again, in this conversation of being a first-round selected wide receiver, the fastest 40 time in combine history, is going to be able to revitalize the deep ball receiving game within this offense and find himself a lot of success within the screen game. In the absence of Marquise Hollywood Brown, as he continues to miss time, Xavier Worthy will continue to be the number 2 receiving option of this offense, just behind of Rashee Rice. Number 44, we have Ladd McConkey, another rookie wide receiver we wanted to mention. Like I mentioned earlier with Joshua Palmer, no Eckler, no Keenan Allen, no Mike Williams, no Gerald Everett. The target vacancy pretty much justifies that there is going to be 2 receiving threats within this offense that are going to find themselves success. The expectation is that that is going to be Joshua Palmer and Ladd McConkey. And though it'll be a little bit more difficult for the rookie to get on the field, especially considering he is a primary slot receiver and on 12 personnel sets when this team wants to run the ball more, he'll obviously have less opportunity than someone like Joshua Palmer. Number 45, we have Khalil Shakir. My expectation is that he finishes the number 1 wide receiver of this offense. Last season, in games in which he played 60 or more % of the offensive snaps, was able to get himself an 11.36 fantasy point per game average. Amongst all players in the league, had the highest catch rate. It was like 86%. He has already built a rapport with Josh Allen. Josh Allen thinks highly of him, and going into this year, I'm excited about the potential of Khalil Shakir being the number 1 of the Bills offense, considering the absence of Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis. Number 46, we have Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers has ranked as the number 29, 24, and 29 wide receiver in a full PPR in the last 3 seasons. Last year, averaging 13.66 fantasy points per game, regardless of whether it was Aiden O'Connell or Jimmy Garoppolo. You get an upgrade with Gardner Minshew, and we've currently heard that there is a potential injury to Brock Bowers. So Jakobi Meyers could be moving up the draft boards very soon. Number 47, we have Christian Watson. Over the course of the last 2 years, in games in which he has played 60% of the snaps or more, he's averaging over 15 fantasy points per game. The issue is he can't stay healthy. And if, in fact, he is going to continue to be this high upside player when healthy, we could take a shot in the dark and throw him on our bench. And if in fact he finds himself on a healthy streak of games, considering how high-powered this offense is now, considering we know what the value of Jordan Love really sits at, Christian Watson is not a bad option for a wide receiver 4. Number 48, we have Brandin Cooks. Last season benefited greatly from the fact that he had 8 receiving touchdowns. He finishes wide receiver 38 in a full PPR, but again, only had 54 receptions. So he was able to score a touchdown 1 out of every 6.76 receptions that he made. He's going to be a solid flex, averaged 10.8 fantasy points per game last year. So if in fact this offense with no other target competition, added to it, the only target competition being Ferguson and Lamb, making Brandin Cooks the number 3, if this is a top 10 offense once again, should be of great value. The final 2 I wanted to mention are Keon Coleman, a rookie wide receiver in the 2nd round. Again, considering the fact that we have someone like Curtis Samuel dealing with a turf toe, and the fact that, of course, we're going to continue to see Josh Allen throw the ball a lot, the expectation is that there should be another wide receiver within this offense that is still fantasy relevant. The final wide receiver I wanted to mention is Jordan Addison. The only reason I have him at 50 is because, again, we are uncertain of his current health. He is dealing with an ankle injury. Last season, in games in which he played with Justin Jefferson and without Kirk Cousins, was able to average nearly 13 fantasy points per game. So if, in fact, he is ready by week 1, fantastic. If not, throw him on your IR and wait, because once he returns, in the absence of Hawkinson, he's going to be the number 2 receiving threat and will find a lot of fantasy value. All right, guys, I know I talked fast, but there was a lot of wide receivers to talk about. Hope you enjoyed today's content. Hope you have an incredible draft this upcoming weekend. Best of luck. The next time I talk about rankings in regards to wide receivers will be for week 1. So until next time, again, click the like button, subscribe down below, and of course, check out Underdog Fantasy. Check out the Patreon if you guys want my rankings for your upcoming draft, all that included. All the information down in the description. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.